of the people polled now in the United States, for example, believe that climate change is a significant concern to the nation and the planet.
Yeah, 71% of Americans think it's moderately, very, or extremely important that the world reach an agreement to limit global warming at the Paris Summit. And 64% think the U.S. should do more or much more to address global warming. So yes, there are people opposed, but they are very much in the minority at this point.
At this point. Well, I want to talk about possible actions, because are we talking about the complete elimination of fossil fuels?
Yeah, so there's two general approaches to this, or really three, and some are more painful than others.
Mm-hmm.
One is you can outright ban fossil fuels. That would be an extremely painful way of dealing with it. Another approach is to put a cap on emissions and then sell permits to emit. And that is the approach that is being discussed most at the conference. There's a third way involving putting a price on emissions that accounts for the costs that consumers are not presently paying when they use fossil fuels. Consumers aren't paying for the cost of military ensuring access to Middle East oil. The taxpayers are paying for that, not the consumer. Consumers aren't paying for the health care costs and shortened lives associated with mining coal or burning fossil fuel. And consumers aren't paying for the cost of impacts of climate change. And so the notion is that we put a price on fossil fuel carbon that accounts for that impact, and then return all the revenue to the economy as a monthly dividend to every person. And if you do that, we find that the economy could actually be stimulated. The market will find carbon-free substitutes to fossil fuel, like fuel cell-powered excavators, that sort of thing. The market can do wonderful things if you turn it loose.
So what is a timeline that we're talking about? Because obviously we're not going to eliminate fossil fuels next year. That, I mean, it's a longer process than just being cut off, isn't it?
Yeah, so we really only have a certain amount of fossil fuel that we can burn before going beyond this 2-degree target. If we get started now on reducing our emissions, then it can be a gradual path towards meeting that goal. If we wait for 20 years, then when climate becomes really bad, then we'll have to take very drastic and painful measures. So it's better to get started and do this gradually, reduce our emissions down to maybe 20% of present by 2050. That would be a good path to go on.
So reduce 20% by 2050.
Down to 20% of present.
Okay, all right. And I'll look for someone to provide that. But today we're talking specifically about the Paris Climate Conference, and that is how I approach this. I want to get back to talking about possible actions, and where is there any teeth in the agreement to hold anyone accountable to what they might agree to?
Yeah, I would say there's no real teeth, except for the fact that almost every nation sees a threat to climate change and is motivated to prevent it, and cannot expect other countries to take action to reduce emissions if they don't reduce emissions themselves. Perhaps down the line we will have a formal treaty, but at this point that's not been the focus. It's been on these declarations and commitments.
So has this been attempted before, to bring this many countries together? Is it the first time that this level of involvement by the nations, the planet's nations, has come together like this?
No, there have been a number of these meetings. The first one was in Kyoto in the 90s, and the problem with that one was they did try to get treaties, and the stumbling block was that the developing countries would not commit to reducing emissions because they wanted to develop.
Right.
And so now we've taken a more flexible approach. So China is reducing their emissions per GDP, and so the GDP emissions might go up as GDP increases, but by focusing on the efficiency of increasing the GDP, then they can make progress.
All right, we're going to take a break here. We have some calls, and we want to get to those calls as soon as we come back. We're talking about what's going on at the Paris Climate Conference and about climate change in general. How will people, how is the business community reacting to this? Because they are going to be affected by how they use energy.
Yes, the business community really is coming on board. There is a group of 78 major companies, HSBC, Siemens, Nestle, Pepsi, General Mills, that have an annual turnover of $2.1 trillion. They've written an open letter to world leaders urging governments to include pricing of carbon emissions as part of policies to curb global warming. They want a price signal on carbon for their business planning. They see opportunities that would create economic growth and jobs.
Mm-hmm.
This is business. There's also a group of high-level country leaders, company CEOs, civil society organizations, World Bank President and International Monetary Fund Director Christine Lagarde have launched the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition. Again, they're calling for pricing on carbon to deal with this problem because they see impacts of warming and they see opportunities.
So new opportunities are being developed.